Dear Sir and Madam, Namaste and a good evening to all who are from Nepal, and good afternoon to Professor Sarah Mercer. I am Regina Casey, moderator of today's session on behalf of Continuing and Professional Education Center of Kathmandu University School of Education. I would like to welcome all our valued participants, educators, and professors from home and abroad in this session. As we all know, our Continuing and Professional Education Center is one and only the authorized training center of Kathmandu University to conduct various programs based on teachers' professional development like TPD session, training, seminars, certain long-term courses, webinars like this. Today, we have brought a discourse on teacher well-being through this webinar. As we all know, we have Professor Sarah Mercer from University of Graz to deliver her talk on teacher well-being and the foundation of good practices. Likewise, we have professors and department heads and coordinator of CPC program of the Kathmandu University in this session. I would like to express my deep gratitude for your gracious presence here. To begin the session, let me introduce our today's speaker with her brief bio first. Sarah Mercer is professor of foreign language teaching at the University of Graz, Austria, where she is head of ELT methodology. Her research interests include all aspects of the psychology surrounding the foreign language learning experience. She is the author, co-author, and co-editor of several books in this area. She has served as principal investigator on several funded research projects and has worked on the editorial board of various journals. Was also a co-editor of System for several years and is also co-editor of Multilingual Master's Psychology of Language Learning and Teaching book series, and who is currently serving as Vice President of IAPLL and is Ambassador of IATEFL. Professor Mercer, you have 1 hour almost for your sharing, and we open the forum for the discussions also once you finish your talk. And dear participants, if you have any questions and queries, you can put it in the chat box. So, dear Professor, your presence is truly an honor for us. So we are very much excited to embark this journey of knowledge exploration and teacher well-being. I would like to welcome you here to commence the session. Over to you, Professor. Thank you very much. You can begin the session now.
Thank you so much, Regina. Thank you also to all of you for taking the time to come. I really appreciate that you have come on your Saturday afternoon to join this session. I thank you for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to talk with you. So I will, just to begin with, I'll just explain that I misunderstood. So I've actually prepared for a 90-minute talk, not a 1 hour talk. So I will make changes as I go along. So if I jump over some slides, I apologize. It was my misunderstanding of the time, and we'll make the slides available so you can look through them more leisurely afterwards. So don't worry about that if I jump over things for practical reasons. I've also got, Regina had the brilliant idea, I've also got my laptop open at the side so I can see the chat box, because I'd like to make it a little bit interactive. One of the things about webinars that can be a bit kind of deadening is that you just sit and listen to me, and I don't get any interaction with you, and I don't get to learn about things in your country and your situation and your understanding. So I've got in places where I'm going to make it a little bit interactive, and I promise I'll leave time at the end for us to talk. So let me just, there we go. Can everybody see that? Oh, in fact, I can see on my other screen that we're starting to see it. There we go. Perfect.
Yes.
Look at the picture that I've taken, your beautiful country that I haven't yet been able to visit, but I'm sure that I will one day. I'm going to talk about this topic has become very dear to my heart, and I'm going to talk about how I came to the topic, what I understand by it, and why I think it is so important that we understand the nature of well-being as the foundation of good teaching practice, that it's not, for me, an optional extra, something that we can do if we feel like we've got a bit of extra time, something that would be nice to attend to, but it's actually the basics, that if we support teachers and ensure that their well-being is the best it can possibly be, they're then in the position to teach to the best of their abilities. So let's use a chat box. What do you feel has the biggest impact on student achievement? So if you're looking at learners and you want to understand what contributes to their success, what are some of the factors? There are lots of things we could include. What are some of the things that have a big impact on student achievement? Maybe you can use a chat box to just share some of your thoughts. What some of the things are that you feel are particularly impactful on student achievement? I know there's usually a little bit of a delay, so I'll just wait and see what people share, any ideas that you've got. Right, so Sarita says the relationship with the facilitator. So I think relationships are hugely important. For me, we're also one of the foundations of good practice. Engagement, apathy. So I love the fact that you've got those two side by side. Motivation, so those all kind of belong together. You see, Ayan says the teacher's motivation. We'll come back to that in a moment. Regina says teacher's personal well-being, also the relationship between home and classroom. Positive reinforcement. Oh, I like that very much. Autonomy, that's also linked again to engagement and motivation. Students getting affected, so their emotional response to what happens in the classroom. Some super ideas. All of those things obviously impact. And what's kind of interesting to look at is, some of you may be familiar with the Hattie studies. So Hattie, what he did was, he, with colleagues obviously in the end, he looked at all the different studies that have been done, and he did what's known as a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis just means you take all the different studies, put them together and look what come out as like the key factors. And the largest impact, the largest variance was explained by students themselves, so the characteristics they have. But that also includes things like student motivation, student engagement, things that you referred to here, students' emotional responses. So those are things that are also indirectly impacted by the teacher. The teacher can affect learner motivation. The teacher can affect learner engagement. They can affect the kind of emotions. And I think it was Regina who talks about the relationship between student and teaching and learning. And then you've got teacher as the other contributing factor. So we've got 30% of success in learning is down to the teacher themselves, the teacher as a person, as an individual. And the 50% that's down to students is also mediated by teachers. So that means nearly 80% of what happens in the classroom is actually going to impact on success, is controlled or influenced by teachers. So teachers matter, and they matter an enormous amount. And yet, we haven't really talked a lot about teacher psychology. So teacher psychology, teacher well-being. I've probably spent the last 15 years of my career. I was a language teacher, and I dedicated the start of my career was looking very much at learner psychology, learner emotions, learner self-concept, well-being, and so on. And then I started to look at learner psychology. So psychology more broadly. So someone talked about teacher motivation, teacher emotions. And then I sort of started to focus on teacher well-being. Why, using the chat box, why do you think that teacher wellbeing has been so neglected? Because before COVID, there were in total, I was able to find for the years pre-COVID, 11 studies in total that had looked at language teacher wellbeing. And why do you think that teachers generally, their psychology has been neglected, but specifically the topic of well-being? Why do you think maybe that hasn't, also thinking about your own context, why have people not talked about that more? Why is it now becoming of interest? But why did people not talk about this more before? And I'm talking deliberately before COVID, and we'll come to the changes that have happened due to COVID and the pandemic. What are some of the reasons, maybe in your setting, why people haven't talked about it so much? Have you got any thoughts about this, or the status of teacher psychology in your context? I know that now it's experiencing an upsurge, which is wonderful, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But why do you feel, or why in your setting maybe has this not received the attention? Where are the priorities been, maybe? I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on this. I don't know if you've got any thoughts. So like I say, when we started to look at this, I think, Chapman says, I think there was people just not aware how important well-being was for actual learning processes. I think before COVID, Regina says it just wasn't a priority. People didn't think about it as an issue. So one of the things that we found in our work is that the focus has tended to be on learners, which is understandable. And of course, we want to focus on learners. We want to understand they're always going to be a priority for us. But we failed to acknowledge that the teacher impacts the learner a lot. And their psychology dictates the kind of relationships in the classroom, the emotions in the classroom, how people feel, how motivated learners are, their willingness to engage, and so on. So there was a lot of focus on the learner. This whole learner-centeredness meant that the focus switched to the learner, and the teachers were kind of neglected generally. But also then the topic of well-being was seen as kind of superfluous. That's something to do in your leisure time. Without understanding, which we do understand better now, is that actually when you understand the nature of teacher well-being, you realize what a massive impact it has on how we teach, the way we relate to learners, the kind of relationships that we're able to build, the emotions that learners experience, and so on. And I also think there's been this, what I call a toxic discourse. This is a very famous, meant to be inspirational quote. A good teacher is like a candle, it consumes itself to light the way for others. And I think this is incredibly damaging. A good teacher should not need to burn themselves out, quite literally is what this is saying, in order to be a good teacher and to serve others. And I think this has also been a problem in teacher discourse, is that teaching is such an other-oriented profession. We're so focused on helping others, supporting others, and that's a wonderful part of what we do. But we mustn't consume ourselves and damage ourselves in doing that, because it means we're not there to help people in the future. So this is actually what I consider a very dangerous, very damaging discourse, is this idea of the teacher must somehow martyr themselves for their learners. That's just unhealthy for everybody, obviously for the teacher, but it's not going to make for good teaching practice in the long run. So I think this is a very dangerous discourse. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about what wellbeing is, why language teacher wellbeing is important, a few things that we know about it, and then I've got a nice kind of practical set of things at the end where I've decided to give you some ideas of things that maybe that you would like to do. I'm not quite sure how many of you are teachers, how many are researchers, and where the balance lies. So I may skip over some things, but we can always come back to those at the end if you want. We've got time to do that. So let's use the chat box again to talk about what you understand by well-being. So this is a very complex notion, and it means different things for different people. I'm not even sure there's a definite right and wrong way of talking about this. So maybe you could share in the chat box, what is some of the things that you understand by the notion of well-being? What kind of ideas does it make you think of? Lots of things contribute to well-being. It is quite a complex construct when you start to unpack it. Let's have a little look at what maybe see. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the comments that must have gone through afterwards when I wasn't noticing, but Laxman says well-being has been neglected generally, and quite rightly says, I don't want to burn like a candle and disappear. Absolutely, and that's definitely not what we would like to be. And Surendra says it's our responsibility, and it is, and that's what I hope with this talk and other things that we do, that we bring that in. Physical, mental, emotional, financial well-being, brilliant. All of those things make part of it. Having a fulfilling life, minimizing burnout, that's a really good thing to put together, is to understand that well-being and burnout are two sides of the same coin. Quality of life, work-life balance, good. Happiness, yeah, we'll talk about the positive emotions. Reducing stress, having a sense of satisfaction, brilliant, good things. Anything else? I love all of these things. The balance between the personal and the work life and how we manage those. Yeah, that's a huge, major contributing factor, I think, for most people about their sense of well-being. So well-being was this idea that well-being is where you create a buffer to protect you against burnout. So there was research on burnout in the past, which was looking at people who had burned out and why they'd burned out. But that's a little bit late. So the research on well-being is looking at what contributes to high-low well-being and how can we prevent burnout from happening. So the whole well-being agenda is looking at what can we do in a preventative way to stop it going so far that it leads to burnout. Once we get to burnout, it's too late. It's not too late. You can then repair, but that's a much, much more difficult process. And we don't want anybody to be in that state where they're already experiencing burnout. So well-being is very much about prevention, about understanding the steps you can take to protect yourself, nurture yourself, and ensure that it doesn't get that far. There's been two main perspectives, two main understandings of well-being, and I think this links also with the comments that we have in the chat box here. Also things we've got here now about psychological strength, inner peace, and so on. The two main research approaches have been to look at it from either what we call a hedonic perspective or a eudaimonic perspective. So the hedonic perspective focuses very much on the notion of pleasure, positivity, positive emotions. And the eudaimonic is about having a sense of meaning and purpose. And I think we had both of those covered in the chat box. The hedonic, the research that has been done from the hedonic perspective has used a construct called SWB, which refers to subjective well-being. This is the most common way of looking at it. And what SWB is defined as is a perceived balance between positive and negative emotions. Now notice, this doesn't say that you don't experience negative emotions. That's just nonsense. And some of the more flippant approaches to well-being only look at the positive. That life isn't like that. Everybody experiences positive and negative emotions. That's normal. That's a normal part of life. But well-being is higher when the proportion of emotions is more positive than negative. It doesn't mean ignoring or denying negative, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. But it's about finding that balance between the two, and that essentially we hope that you're experiencing more positive emotions than negative. And it's about overall feeling satisfied with your life. So the fact that there'll be some things that you're not so happy with, some things that are not going well, that is normal. Everybody has things that are not quite right. It's about overall coming to the conclusion that you're satisfied with your life. The really important word in subjective well-being is the notion of subjectivity, is that well-being is a very, very personal experience. I cannot tell you what to feel. I'm not here to prescribe any approach to well-being. I can give you ideas, and then it will be up to you to decide how to approach those and how, which ones are relevant for you. But the important part of this is that it's a subjective experience. So that means that two people can experience the exact same conditions. For one of them, that'll be a very positive experience. For the other one, it will be a very negative experience. The other approach that has been used is what's known as a eudaimonic perspective. And a eudaimonic perspective is about finding meaning and purpose. So this is saying that it's more than just emotions. So it's about this getting the sense, and I think this is quite important for teachers, because teachers do tend to have a sense of meaning and purpose in what we do. Probably one of the most popular models, eudaimonic models, has been the PERMA model by Seligman. And he says that well-being is comprised of positive emotions, so we've just spoken about that. Engagement, that's finding things that you're passionate about, having things that you get excited about, having things that you're dedicated and enjoy. Relationships is key, so having positive relationships in your family, with your friends, in your workplace, with your students. Getting a sense of meaning out of what you do, out of things in your life about, this can be spiritual, but this can also be in very practical little senses. And having a sense of accomplishment. And accomplishment is one of the ones that has been most widely misunderstood. This doesn't mean that you're all driving around in a Ferrari and living in a mansion. Accomplishment is about doing things that matter to you and achieving goals that matter to you. So that can be big things, it can be small things, but it's about doing things that are somehow meaningful for you. One of the things that was changed a few years after it was introduced by Butler and Kern, who have designed something called the PERMA Profiler. For those of you who are interested in the research side of things, they developed a tool to measure well-being. And they added V, so PERMA plus V, and they added V to stand for vitality. And that's the recognition that well-being is about physical and mental well-being, the two sides of the same coin. If you are physically well, that is going to help your well-being. If your well-being is suffering, it will make you susceptible also to physical illness. So the two are very closely related. Now, one thing that I'm going to add here, very conscious, I have never been to Nepal. I don't know the situation in Nepal. I'm going to talk about well-being from my experiences working with teachers in various parts of the world, but having never been to Nepal, you may feel that some of these things are not relevant. And I hope that you will be able to pick out of this and deal and respond to this in ways that seem suitable. one of the things we have been very slow to pick up on is that there may be cultural differences in how people understand well-being, satisfaction, and happiness. So these key concepts may be understood differently in different cultures. There's been a little bit of work done, but not a lot. Some research argues that some notions of this are universal, so that they are the same across cultures, and some are saying actually there are different ways of understanding that. So I think that question is a little bit open still, and research is still needed on that. Now, this is really important to me, and this is a difficulty that we have in researching well-being and talking about well-being. And also, if you are teachers here and listening to this today, what I do not want you to do is I don't want you to leave today's session and think it's all about my responsibility as a teacher. I have to look after myself. It's up to me to engage in self-care. The whole responsibility for my well-being is on me. Well-being emerges from the interplay of, yes, the things that you do as an individual. We can do things to help our well-being. We're not helpless. We have got some agency to do things. However, we are not independent of the social structures, institutions, and systems that they work in. They affect our well-being. They affect how we feel. If we have excessive workload, if we have unreasonable work demands, if we have an unsupportive boss and leadership, all of those things will affect your well-being. So well-being is about things that you can do, your agency, and it is about systemic structural factors, and it's how those two interplay. So when I'm talking today, I can't talk about the structural conditions and the systemic conditions, and that creates a little bit of a tension in that I'm going to focus on things that you can do individually. But we mustn't deny the responsibility and role of leadership and institutions and cultural settings and how that affects our well-being as well. And that might be something we discuss a little bit more at the end of today's session in the Q&A session. So well-being is not just your responsibility. It's an individual experience, but it's also collective. An institution can have well-being. There can be a culture of well-being. There can be a collective sense of well-being in a classroom, in a school, in a group. It's not just subjective and individual. It's also objective and social. So somebody also commented in the comment box about the role of financial well-being. If you are financially struggling, if you can't make ends meet, if you're not getting enough wage for the work that you're doing, of course that's going to impact on your well-being. So we mustn't create an oversimplistic view of well-being that it's about doing a little bit of yoga, a little bit of meditation, getting a better work-life balance, and then everything will be fine. There are systemic aspects to well-being, which does make well-being quite a political topic too. And does mean that we need to address that side of things as well. So I want you to keep that in mind, even when we're making a focus on the subjective and individual today, because that's, the practical things we can attend to. So the definition that I kind of have used and I feel comfortable with at the moment is well-being is a sense of happiness and satisfaction and meaning. So I take a more eudaimonic view that brings in some of the hedonic, but also takes that more finding that self-actualization, finding that connection, finding that meaning in life. And it's from this dynamic interplay. So you've got your personal characteristics and you've got social contextual factors. And it changes. That's what the dynamism refers to. Your well-being isn't like something where you say, okay, I'm going to work on my well-being. Oh, I've got my well-being. It's all fine. I'm sorted now. I wish, but that's not how well-being works. Well-being is a constant adjustment. Sometimes we have it better under control, sometimes we don't. And we need to be not too hard on ourselves when it's not going well. We just need to kind of readjust and see how it goes. Are there any questions before I move on that are particularly related to the understandings of well-being? Are there any questions that you want to ask about how I've spoken about it so far, this tension between self and structure? Any questions that you want to ask now before I move on? I'll just give you a second to see. Yeah, do you want to just speak up? Maniram?
Yeah, madam. Good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, Sarah, madam, and all others.
Good evening.
Very happy to hear you and to see your presentation. I want to make one inquiry, ma'am.
Yeah.
can we take well-being and hedonism in similar way or uh, synonymously, ma'am?
No, not in my view. So in my understanding of well-being, so hedonism is this is a very short-lived seeking pleasure, seeking satisfaction, and it's only in the moment. It's fleeting. It's not long-term and it's not lasting. Well-being is about a state over time that's going to also contribute to your longevity, quite honestly. So well-being is much more about that finding meaning and purpose. I think it would be naive to imagine that those moments of pleasure don't contribute to your well-being, but well-being is much more than that for me. I think these moments of pleasure and happiness, of course, they contribute to your enjoyment of life and your satisfaction and your happiness, but that's not enough, in my view, to capture that notion. So I'm really glad that you asked this question. For me, well-being is much more than that. It's a long-term perspective. And of course, we all know, or you maybe are familiar with the notion of the hedonic treadmill. So the hedonic treadmill is something that has been proved repeatedly in research, is that you think you need that car, let's say. You think you need that car. I have to have a Rolls Royce. I need to have a Rolls Royce. If I have a Rolls Royce, I'll be happy. So you get your Rolls Royce and you are happy for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then you get familiar with it. You're used to it. You always have the Rolls Royce. That's your car. You know, you have that car. You're familiar with it. You want something else. You need something else. What is it now? Oh, I need a helicopter. The helicopter is what I need. Okay, I'm exaggerating wildly, but you get the idea. So the hedonic treadmill is the idea that we get used to increased state of things. When we own something, when we experience something, we get used to a higher level of standard of living and so on, and then we want more and we want more and we want more, and if we're not careful, we're never happy, and we get on what's known as the hedonic treadmill. And the hedonic treadmill is always looking for more, always looking for new things, always wanting something else, never being satisfied, as opposed to taking stock of the present, understanding the bigger picture, looking at the meaning of life, looking at your role in life, looking at your relationships, being grateful for what we have in the present, understanding the meaning of where happiness comes from. So I'm really, really glad you asked this question. I think hedonic moments of hedonism, when it's not damaging to others, because that will also damage your well-being ultimately, but moments of pleasure and happiness, of course, contribute to well-being. But the notion of well-being is a much bigger notion that has a longer term perspective, that's something that has meaning, connection, is about you within the social collective and that relationship over time. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, madam. Thanks, madam, so much. Mm,
Thank you. I'm glad.
yes.
Somebody else has a
Yes.
question? I'm not. Yes. Hi, please go ahead.
Excuse me. Good evening, respected madam, and all the respected personality and my dear friends. What is well-being for a school student, and how does it play vital role in his school life, experience life?
That's a very good question. And I'm focusing on the teacher today because the teacher is the one that's usually neglected. But you're quite right that well-being, the good thing is, there's a lot of research to show that if teachers experience high well-being, it's much more likely their learners experience high well-being too. So that's the good news, is that when we work on teacher well-being, we, as a byproduct, also affect learner well-being. And we can actually affect learner well-being very explicitly and deliberately. And maybe I need to come back and do another talk on that, because we've just finished writing a paper we did some research on well-being literacy in the language classroom, but that perhaps is another talk. But learner well-being has a huge impact on their willingness to engage, their willingness to use the language, their willingness to take risk and make mistakes. It is a wonderful buffer against language anxiety, for example. We know that it has an impact on the relationships students form in the classroom and how they connect with other students, and that's key in a language classroom. So learner well-being is massively important, and there are deliberate things we can do to affect learner well-being positively. And one of those things is also looking at teacher well-being. So, my hope is that when we look at this today and you go away and hopefully you're a little bit inspired to pay attention to these things, that will actually impact your learners. And that's one of these massive misunderstandings, is looking at the teacher does not mean not looking at the learner. Actually looking at the teacher, when you go into a classroom, you know how it is. I'm sure everyone in this room knows. When you go into the classroom and you're in a great mood and you're happy and you're positive, you have a good teaching session, your learners pick up on your mood. And if you go in and you're tired and you're exhausted and you've got no patience, the chances that your learners will feel the same way are very high. So I think understanding that those two things are related, and that working on language teacher wellbeing is good for language learner wellbeing is hugely important to grasp. Again, a brilliant question, and I'm very glad that you asked it, and I'm hoping that was a useful answer for you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Super. So let me move on a little bit. Why language teacher wellbeing matters? Well, I think we've kind of answered that a little bit now. I've just got some of the statistics of the States. So there's record rates of burnout and teachers leaving the profession, and it has increased 12% since the pandemic. So what the pandemic did, that's very positive side effect, is it did draw attention to just how important learner and teacher wellbeing is in the educational process. And there was some talk before, but it really threw it into the limelight. And there's a real acceptance and understanding now that good educational processes have to center around wellbeing. Those of you who are maybe familiar with the OECD, the European measurements, and the PISA studies, some of you might be familiar with the notion of PISA studies. They have made learner and teacher wellbeing core measurements in their assessment of educational systems. And that's a massive statement. So what they're saying is, when you go to look at an education system and you want to evaluate the health of that education system, only looking at student achievement is a very distorted picture. So they have added learner and teacher wellbeing. And what they're saying is, if we want to understand the health and how effective and how good an education system is, yeah, we need to understand achievement and test scores and so on. But we also need to understand the well-being and health of the key players in that system. And that's leadership, teachers, and learners, and so on. So well-being has become much more in the centerfold, but it still needs a lot of work and attention in practical terms. In the UK, for example, just as an example, 77%, I mean, that's an incredible amount, report poor health due to work. And yet, look at all this research. When teachers have high well-being, we know they teach more creatively. They're willing to try out new materials. They're willing to try out new activities. They're willing to be a little bit adventurous in their teaching practice. They're not just going to resort to the same old things. They have better relationships in the classroom. A consequence of that is they have fewer discipline problems. They have higher levels of achievement. Their learners in scores usually are higher. And they have students that have higher well-being and lower psychological distress. So everybody benefits when teacher well-being is high. And it's still amazing that we're still having to fight for this to be recognized as a key ingredient for good practice. I had a little look at well-being in Nepal. So I did a little bit of trying to find out. So I looked at the World Health Organization. They talk about the fact that 4% of Nepal's population are experiencing mental health disorders and mental health issues, with a higher number among teenagers. So particularly thinking about the question that we just had about learners in school, that's quite an interesting issue. Globally speaking, that's relatively low compared to other countries. However, there's a big shift post-pandemic, and a study in 2020 showed that half of the respondents were reporting one psychological symptom. So as in many countries in the world, the situation has got worse post-pandemic for a whole variety of reasons, particularly in the education sector, where things have changed, expectations have changed, and we've also got a generation of students who had disrupted education at that time. So my argument is that teachers' wellbeing is the foundation of good practice. It's the title of the talk. I don't think it's an optional extra. I don't think it's something that it's nice to do if we have time. I think it should be in teacher education programs. We need to teach people how to take care of themselves. We need to make it part of the discourse. We need to get research about this. We need to have advocacy. We need to get policymakers to talk about this more seriously. So I think there's a greater recognition of its importance, but I still think we have a little bit of a way to go just yet. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to skip over this, but this will be available. This is a book that came out with my team. We had a very big research project looking at the well-being of English language teachers working in Austria and foreign language teachers working in the UK. So those were things like teachers of Spanish, German, Chinese in the UK, in an English-speaking country, and here the English language teachers. We had an enormous amount of data, which has turned into this book. I think the important thing that I want you to take from this, and I'm going to, as I say, I'm cutting short because I prepared a different amount of time and I'm just going to focus on some of the other things, is you experience different issues at different stages of your career. Whether you're a late career teacher, so a late career teacher, for example, is someone who's got 24 plus years of teaching experience. Mid-career is 8 to 23. Early career is just starting to the first 7 years. Whether you're pre-service, early career, mid-career, or late career, you experience different issues in respect to well-being. So for early career teachers, they're still developing their professional identity. They're still finding their position within the school. They're still very uncertain. They don't have high confidence. If you get to mid-career, they're very confident. You've seen it all, heard it all, been there before. But sometimes they are balancing issues in their private life. They've got responsibilities with caring for elderly relations or having kids at home. They're starting to slow down a little bit. I know, I'm in that stage. So you're starting to slow down a little bit. And if you're in late career, you have got a whole other set of issues that you're looking towards retirement. You're taking stock. You have a lot of skills that you can draw on, but you've also got, new things to adapt to that maybe don't fit with your view of teaching and so on. So the important thing to understand is I cannot give you one magic recipe for well-being. And also, when we're doing research on well-being, we need to be aware that people at different stages of their career have got different resources, so strengths that they can draw on to protect and help their well-being and boost their well-being. But they're also facing different types of challenges. So there are different challenges for people at different stages in their career. What we also noticed was that there were different issues across the groups of teachers, those working in the UK and those working in Austria. So different things about the training system, socialization processes, how teaching functions in the classroom, the types of reforms that are being introduced. And also a big issue was also the difference in status. So for the Austrian teachers, English has got very high status. It's central to the school leaving exam. So they were considered as very high prestige positions. English language teachers have a high status here in Austria. In the UK, foreign languages were often voluntary. Many children were not motivated to study the language. It had very low status, unless it was a heritage language, which is a bit of a different issue. So what you see is that when you understand teacher well-being, context matters. So people face different issues depending what language they teach, what country they teach it in, what kind of institution they teach it in, what level that they're teaching in. So there can never be one straightforward recommendation for well-being. We need to understand the individual, what stage of their life they're at, what they're experiencing, and also the context that they're working in. What kind of challenges do they face in that particular setting that they're working in? So we've talked before, and I'm not going to dwell on this tension between what can you do as an individual and what kind of structural systemic factors are in place. And I'm going to focus now very much on the things that you can do, the more practical side of things, the things that you can do to affect your own well-being. I am going to say this very deliberately. I'm not sure about the situation in Nepal, but here in Austria, there is still a reluctancy for people to talk about mental health issues or to talk about burnout. People are a little bit shy, a little bit embarrassed. It's not, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's a taboo, but it's something that people are reluctant to talk about. And we need to overcome that. We need to make this something that we're comfortable talking about and that we acknowledge it's just a part of being a human being. So please, if you are at any risk of burnout or you feel that you are struggling with your mental health and your well-being in a serious way, please do not be afraid or embarrassed to seek help. It's important that we normalize conversations about this. So I just decided to focus on 3 things that are within your locus of control. So things that you can make a difference in terms of your well-being. So this is now where I move to the more practical side of things. I've chosen 3 things. What you pay attention to, so the positivity we bring into our lives, thinking back to the definitions, remember that we talked about that relative balance, how we choose to interact with others, the relationships in our lives, and how we manage our time. So recharging our batteries, and we come to the work-life balance that a lot of people talked about. So I'm just going to focus on those 3 things. Again, I'm conscious of time, so I may jump over some of the suggestions, but I promise to make the slides available so you can look through these a little bit more at leisure. So let's look at the first one, positivity. Tell me what you see on the screen. It is a little bit of a trap question, but still, play along with me. Take a look at the screen. Tell me what you see. What is it you see on the screen? Use the chat box. Oh, I'm going to have a little read of the comments as well now while you put the new comments in. Yes. Okay, Regina says that you're also reluctant to talk about that. Yeah, we're very reluctant in Austria to talk about that. And I think it is a problem. We need to normalize it. It's just a normal part of life, isn't it? Life is made up of physical and mental well-being, and being able to talk about that comfortably is important. Anybody want to say what they see on the screen? And I mean really literally what you see on the screen. It's a little bit of a trick question, but it's deliberate. You see a blue dot inside a box. Exactly what I wanted you to say. Thank you for doing that. I can see a dot. Wonderful. I appreciate that you take part. Blue dot inside a cage. Oh, I like that, how you worded that, inside a cage. Laxman says a white sheet and a blue dot. Something can change. I can change the blue dot. Okay, good. Now, in life, humans have got, in psychology, we talk about humans having what we call a negativity bias. And it's a normal thing that we tend to focus on the negative more easily than we do on the positive. So I don't know about you, but if I have a class of 25 students and 24 students say, Sarah, I loved your class. It was great. I enjoyed the class. I learned a lot. And one person says, I really didn't enjoy your class. I didn't learn anything from you. I will completely obsess about that one student who didn't like my class, and I'll forget about the 24 who said they loved it. And that's kind of human nature. And that's what this is supposed to represent, is that the blue dot, if you like, is the negativity. And we zone in on that, and we tend to focus on that. And if you look at the media and the newspapers, they always like to report all that negativity. And we forget about that white space. We forget about all that other positive stuff that's going on. We just don't notice it because we're so fixated. That blue dot is so visible to us. So we get what we focus our attention on, quite literally. What we look at, what we read, what we listen to, the kind of music, the people we talk to, that creates our reality. And that reality will be more positively or negatively tinged depending what we put our attention on and what we give our attention to. So, go out of our way to find the good news and the kindness. I have a website called Good News. I think it's Good News Network. And I deliberately read things on that to remind myself. It's not that I don't read the regular news. That's part of life, and I need to know about that as well. But sometimes I need to really remind myself actively that there's good people in the world and good things happening too. So we don't lose sight of that and forget that. And this is an important thing to note. And this comes back to this definition at the very beginning we had about this relative balance between positives and negatives. When we focus on the positives, it is not bashing, ignoring, trying to stifle, trying to ignore the negatives. That isn't what it's about. Mark Brackett, who's a researcher at Yale, he talks about giving yourself permission to feel. That full rainbow of emotions is part of the human experience. So give yourself permission to have a range of emotions, acknowledge them, give them space, but also help yourself to focus on and deliberately cultivate positive emotions. Now, gratitude practices, any of you who are maybe more spiritual may do this automatically anyway. But this is something that there's a lot of research that provides strong evidence that when we engage regularly in gratitude practices, it has a positive effect on our well-being. Now, what is actually happening in a gratitude practice? So a gratitude practice refers to, for example, at the end of the day, when I go to bed, before I go to sleep at night, I always just take a minute or two to think about what I am grateful for. I always do this, and I've done it for a number of years now. And I think about what went well today, what did I enjoy, what things am I thankful for. So just taking a kind of positive stock of the day. It has two effects. One, I go to sleep thinking about the nice things in my day. And two, what happens with gratitude practices is you literally start to train your brain to see and become aware of the positives around you, so that you become more conscious of that white space and you don't go blind to it. One evening of doing a gratitude practice is not going to make you happy. It's a practice. That means when you make it a habit and you do it over time, you literally train your brain to become aware of and see in your daily life the things that we have to be grateful for and thankful for. And that can also be things it can be things like, I'm grateful that I'm healthy today. I'm thankful that I can be in this webinar. I'm thankful that I had this lovely conversation today. I'm thankful that this car didn't bump into me this morning. It looked like it might do, but it didn't. I'm glad that that didn't happen. So there's many, many things that we can be grateful for. And developing the habit of a gratitude practice is one very important way of readjusting our lens of positivity to make sure that we see it, that we see the things around us. There's also something called savoring, which is another way of readjusting and trying to be a bit more conscious of the positivities. And one of the things that humans can do is what we call time travel, mental time travel. So if you are having a very stressful moment at work and you just need to kind of calm down for a minute and just get a little bit of moment, those of you who meditate may be able to just meditate and have a moment of mindfulness. Or you can also do what we call savoring, where you can go to a memory that you've got of something that you love that made you very happy and really try to recreate that in your mind, all the senses and thinking about that. And that can be a way to just create that positive flow. So if we had more time and if we were in person, I'd make you share a story now of something positive, and you would see that you physically start to feel better and people start to smile and the whole energy in the room changes. So maybe try that. If you go to the staff room and you have a staff meeting in person, get everybody to share something positive. You'll be amazed. You will physically feel the atmosphere and the energy in the room starts to change, because we experience emotions even when you're not actually doing the thing, but you're just remembering it. So I'm sure that you have, for example, woken up from a dream and the emotional tenor of that dream is still with you, because emotions are a very visceral, physical thing that we have. You can savor something in the present, become very conscious of the moment, and you can also have things that you're looking forward to and savor that, start to imagine what it's going to be like and look forward to it. So these are ways of training ourselves to be able to become more conscious of the positive things in life, not ignoring the negative. They need managing, they need space, they need attention, they need us to respond, but creating a little bit of balance. I'm going to skip over those because I know that I need to finish soon. I'm going to focus a little so that I can get through all three of them. Again, don't worry, we can come back to those if we feel that we want to use the Q&A for that, but otherwise I'll make sure that you have the slides, so don't worry. So how I interact with others, the relationships that we have. What do you think is the quote? Why have I put this beautiful picture of this beautiful island? Anybody guess my thinking? Anybody guess what quote I want to use? Anybody got any ideas about the quote I want to use? It's a famous quote in English. You might not know it, but it's a lovely image and a lovely quote to understand just how important relationships are for us. Anybody goes? Oh, hi, it's nice to see you here. Inner peace that's what that picture does for me as well. It also gives me inner peace when I look at that. This is actually the quote from Donne that is, no man is an island. And no man is an island means that we are all part of the tapestry of humanity. We are all connected to one another. We are all interlinked. We all have social relationships that we are part of. We're not separate from that. And so relationships are absolutely central for our well-being, because we are social beings, because humans are social beings. We're not an island. We're not absolutely, we don't, unless you're deliberately a hermit, you are part of that. And this is, I think, the thing that we need to become conscious of, is that relationships are effortful. We have to invest time and energy if we want quality relationships back. Now, in the classroom, for example, this means that we spend time on icebreaker activities, or we spend time doing the get to know you activities in the classroom, because that's very important that you build up those positive relationships within the group. but also with colleagues, taking time to do things together, ask each other how the day's going, be conscious of each other. In your personal life, sometimes the people we are closest to and that we love most dearly are the ones that we can take for granted sometimes. We're used to them being there. We love them. We're grateful to them. But sometimes we don't invest the time and the quality and the effort in nurturing our relationships. So knowing how important they are for well-being, I think my plea is that we invest a little bit more consciously. In the workplace, I think everyone wants a RASH. I love this acronym. They need to feel, everybody, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're the boss, whether you are the administrative staff, whether you're the librarian, everybody needs to feel respected, appreciated, supported, and heard. If you are in a leadership position, please think about that in relation to every single person in your workplace. Do they feel respected? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel supported? And do they feel heard in terms of what they need and they need to see? Is there a way that you can make people feel more respected, appreciated, supported, and heard? Everybody has got agency to do some things like that. And so maybe think if you've got a colleague that you could connect with, you've got somebody that you could say something nice to, share some materials with, do something kind to. I'm going to click over this again because it's not so. Big question for you. Who's important to you and who deserves more of your quality time? You don't need to share this. I think this is a very personal question, but maybe just take a second now to think of the people in your life. Who's very important to you? Who matters to you? And you've got lots of people, I imagine, that matter to you. But is there anybody where you think about your relationship with them and think, maybe they deserve a little bit more attention from me. Maybe they deserve a little bit more quality time with me. The irony is if you spend time on the relationship with them, the fact that your relationship will be strengthened and you have a better relationship with each other the effort comes back 100-fold to your well-being, because we're not an island, because our relationships matter to who we are. Important things about all relationships is investing in time and energy and spending quality time together. I was at a meeting somewhere else, and I watched two people who were together who were partners, and they were just on their phones. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't ask each other how they were doing. They didn't invest in that moment of being together. And I thought it was kind of sad. We all need to work on communication. I'll come to that in a moment. And it's good to try perspective switching. Imagine, what does that person need from me? How are they feeling? How can I support them more? How could I be a better friend, a better colleague, a better partner to them? And engaging in acts of kindness. I don't care how idealistic this makes me, but I think if we're a little bit kinder to each other, I think it makes the world a better place. It creates a nicer work climate. It creates a nicer classroom atmosphere. And I think kindness is something that I would strongly encourage. Even small acts of kindness can make a profound difference to someone else. You don't know what other people are experiencing. You don't know what they're going through in their life. And maybe even just a smile, just a holding the door open, just a quick question of, hi, how's it going? How are you feeling today? Maybe that makes a big difference. It makes them seen. It makes them heard. It makes them feel that they matter. Now, this is the thing that teachers, most of us as teachers, myself included, really need to think about, is that good communication depends almost more on our ability to listen than it does our ability to speak. Can we really hear what people are telling us? Can we ask interested? Can we show that we're interested? Do we ask follow-up questions? Do we ask them to expand? Do we really hear what they're telling us? And I love this quote. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. And I think this is really good advice for relationships, whether that's with the learners, with colleagues, or at home, is to learn to listen, to be a better listener when we're thinking about other people. So the final thing that I'm going to look at that's related to some of the things that you've spoken about and some of the things that we talked about earlier about work-life balance is this, how we manage our time. Now, I have to confess, I don't like the term work-life balance. And I'm wondering if you can guess why. What is it I don't like about that? I'm wondering if you want to use the chat box, if you can guess why I'm unhappy with this term. And I've given you an alternative term that's used by a woman who's done research called Claire Fox. She talks about symbiosis, which I think is a much nicer notion. And anybody want to comment on why you think I have an allergy to the notion of work-life balance? And I use the term, don't get me wrong, it's very helpful because we all know what is meant by it. But when you start to think about it, it becomes a bit of a challenge. Anybody want to comment why they think?
Yeah, I really want to know why you get irritated to have this work-life balance. Because whenever we talk about well-being, the work-life balance definitely comes since we are the professionals. So I really want to listen.
Brilliant, Regina. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love the fact that we've got, because external factors, because it's a utopia. Absolutely. So there are two things about this that I don't like. The first thing is we have one life, and our life has to include work and non-work. And that's where this idea of symbiosis is I think a nicer notion, is how we have one life. We only have one life. Well, we might not have one life, we might have multiple lives, but at the moment we have this one life, and in our life we have to incorporate the work and the non-work things. That's part of being an adult. And Claire Fox says it's not about magic balance. There is no magic balance. Reggie has said it's a utopia. There's no such thing as this magic balance. We're constantly having to adjust, and sometimes it's better and sometimes it's not. I think what's important is it's an adjustment, and it's a constant adjustment every week, every day, every year. And sometimes it's more difficult to have it as we would wish, and sometimes we have it better under control. That's for everybody. And people manage that also in very individual ways. I'm very, very wary of some of the self-help literature that is very prescriptive about what you must do to get this utopian vision. It's very individual. If you are a young, career-oriented teacher with no family commitments, you may be able to invest more time in work, and you may want to invest more time in work than somebody who has other commitments, maybe with children, maybe with elderly relatives, who's maybe got a passion in the community. Maybe they work in a music group and they enjoy that part of their lives. So it is very individual. You cannot say what one person must do. Everybody has to find their own way of incorporating work and non-work in our lives. Now, time management says that we have to allocate time for work and non-work. Maybe this involves discussing workload and expectations with leadership. I've put question marks. That depends on the kind of relationship you have. But work expands to fill the time you make available for it. Now, this has been shown to be a real issue for teachers with lesson planning. And I know it myself. If I have a whole day to prepare my lessons, I will take a whole day to prepare my lessons. If I've got 2 hours to prepare my lessons, I'll miraculously get it done in 2 hours. And that's this notion of being realistic about our time and thinking, how much time do I really need, and can I be efficient in that time? Time management, I think, should also be reworded as setting priorities. Really, time management is about thinking about what my priorities are and what matters to me. And one of the biggest misunderstandings with time management is we do not want to work more efficiently to do more work. That wasn't the idea. We want to do more work. We want to work more efficiently in order to have more time for leisure, for other things in our life, so that we get the work we need to get done efficiently, so it doesn't go over into our free time and completely swamp our lives. So time management and setting priorities is not about doing more work. It's about doing the work we have to do efficiently so that we have more time for family, friends, and leisure. Let's see, this is the last thing that I'm going to do because I know that I need to come to a close. What are some of your time management tips? This is great when we can share ideas, because very often people have a lot of good ideas about what they want to do. I agree, symbiosis is really difficult. I find it difficult, and I think everybody does. And it's a constant give and take and adjustment. Sometimes we manage it better, sometimes we don't. But being aware of that and trying again to do things a little bit differently and say, okay, this time I'm going to try something different. I need to make some changes. I think that's a good first step. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. It isn't easy, not for anybody, I don't think. So anybody want to share what your time management tips are?
Shall I speak, ma'am?
Please do. Yes, please do.
For me, time management is all about if you prepare your to-do list for the next day with priority, I think you will be able to manage your time perfectly. For me, this is the first tips for the time management.
Brilliant. So very often I'll show you, I'll just give you a sneak preview. You can see I have lots of to-do lists. So drawing up a to-do list, thinking about, and I love the fact that you highlight thinking about your priorities. So having a list, what needs to be done and what's the priority, what needs to happen first. And let's do that first because that's the most important thing. And then we'll see how much time is left for the other things. I think that's brilliant advice. Anybody else want to share anything? Either in the chat box, oh, somebody else has also put in the chat box. Somebody else has said priority-based to-do list, brilliant. And complete them on time. Diaries, having a diary or a journal to see what needs doing and when it needs doing is a good idea. Regina, do you have an idea you're sharing?
Yes, actually, we need to prioritize the things. What the things we need to prioritize. Then it will be easy for us to manage our time, I guess.
Yeah, I think prioritizing is very important, but also, dare I say this, and this is probably uncomfortable for many of us, is do we prioritize our family and friends and our leisure time, or are we always prioritizing things at work? And that's a difficult thing.
Yeah, it's difficult because we have personal and professional both. We have both life, actually, professional and personal. So we need to be able, allocate the time. So
that's right. Exactly.
Priority, right.
Yeah. So one of the other things is being realistic about workload expectations, and that means also learning to say no to things. So nobody wants to say no. We all want to be helpful and support each other, but we sometimes have to be realistic about our time. We have to set boundaries. We have to know what we can and we can't manage to do. And remember that when you say no to one thing, it allows you to say yes to something else. Yes. So making those, again, priority decisions about what you say yes to and what you say no to. Setting boundaries as best you can to weekends and evenings. I don't always have this well under control, but I've started to sort of say after 8 o'clock at night, no more work. I have to have some downtime. And as I get older, it becomes more important for me to do this. Right. I need some downtime where I read or I go in the garden or I meet with a friend before I go to bed at night. If I just keep working until the evening and then go to sleep, it's all in my mind and I can't sleep very well. So setting some kinds of boundaries and saying, okay, and I stop deliberately when it gets to 8 o'clock, even if I'm not finished, I have to stop. And I know that I will benefit if I then don't sacrifice my sleep. Setting time for hobbies, sport, family, friends, putting that in a diary, making an appointment with yourself, making an appointment with your family, really being quite deliberate and explicit about that. Time boxing work, we talked about that a little bit earlier. That's about setting realistic time where you say, okay, I've got these 3 things to do. That should take me 2 hours. So I'm going to set 2 hours for that. That will take me an hour. And I think that's going to also take 2 hours. So splitting your day up, setting the schedule for that, and then doing it. So time boxing is about making sure it doesn't expand in a never-ending way. Letting go of perfection. And particularly as teachers, we are prone to perfection. Knowing when it's enough and that you say, okay, I don't need to do any more. That's enough. Learning to say no, thinking about your priorities. So 3 things we can change: what we pay attention to, so the degree of positivity that we have, how we interact with others, the relationships that we invest in, that we nurture, that we care, so that we experience that nurturing and support from those around us, and how we manage our time so that we have the time to recharge our batteries, so that we don't let ourselves get burned out and everything is about work, but using our time efficiently so that we have some spare time to look after ourselves. My final statement is students deserve great teachers and teachers deserve the support they need to become great. for me, teacher wellbeing is not this optional extra. If we look after ourselves, if our workplaces take our wellbeing seriously, listen to our concerns about workload, time management, and so on, if we can do that, we can allow teachers to be the best they can possibly be. And that needs us to become very serious about teacher wellbeing, not as an optional extra, not as something that individuals have to deal with, but something that we collectively take responsibility for. Thank you so much. This is the book that I did with Tammy. I know many of you know Tammy, that we worked on about teacher wellbeing, and I greatly appreciate you asking me to join you today, and I hope that some of that's useful. I'll make sure that you get the slides via Regina, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have just now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. It was really wonderful. Yes, thank you. You can unshare your screen, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Actually, we have addressed almost all questions and queries over here. And since your session was quite interactive as well, and we did a lot of interaction during the session, and it was really wonderful. Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, we have got so many ideas in terms of teacher well-being and in terms of better teacher well-being. I must say that, which is not just a matter of individual health, happiness. It is far-reaching implications for the entire education system, which really affects students' well-being as well and their learning outcomes at the end of the time, and also in office system. What you have discussed, actually, I have noted this eudaimonic well-being, which I have also discussed in my paper, actually. So it's really important for our self-actualization, so where we are and what we are going to do, and what kind of things that we need to have in our life. So those things should be in a proper way. And also the another thing, self and system, that really triggered my mind, actually, how important that we need to understand our self and system to affect our personal well-being. Thank you very much. Do you find any questions and queries over there? Chairman, actually, he has expressed gratitude.
There's 3 questions that I see from Chestnut in the chat box. So there's the first one, the role of savoring and mindfulness in promoting well-being. I think that's hugely important. I think that that's part of that redressing the balance, that we see more of the positivity, that we give ourselves time. I think everything tends to go at such a fast pace now. And you might be aware of what they call the slow movement. So slow travel, slow academics, slow reading. And finding the time to be mindful of the moment, to slow down, to give ourselves time to appreciate things. So I was just on holiday, and the temptation to just take photographs of everything is huge. And we know that actually when you do take a photograph, it is actually quite good because it focuses your attention to things, you become aware of things. But then also putting the camera down and just becoming aware of the moment, becoming aware of where you are and the sounds and the smells, I think that can be hugely important as well. So I think those are great questions and hugely important. How can your teacher promote holistic well-being amid chaos? That's incredibly difficult. And that's why we've got, exactly as Regina just said, this tension between self and system. And I do think that the most effective way is to understand that we're not an island, and that to get together as a collective voice. So finding people that we can connect with and coming together as a group, not as individuals, but saying we need to work on our well-being together as a community, getting the teachers in a staff room, getting the teachers in an institution to come together. And also we have more voice as a group very often. So if we are going to advocate for change in the setting that we're in, that's very difficult to do as an individual. But I think we've got 2 things. If we can address our individual well-being, we will have more energy and enthusiasm to work with others, to nurture those relationships, and then to collectively advocate for change. So that's I don't know how idealistic or realistic that is, but I think working together with others for well-being, it can be very powerful. And I think we can often achieve more with others than we do on our own. And the third is, why do people not count the blessings and get distracted by the blue dot? I'm afraid to say that's human nature. If you Google negativity bias, you'll see that humans are a little bit biased towards the negative. That's kind of human nature. And that's why these kind of savoring and gratitude practices are so important, because it just allows us to create a bit of balance and redress that a little bit. So not ignoring the negatives, we're aware of those, we can attend to those, but also allowing us, like you say, to not just see the blue dot, but look at also that white space and become aware of the positives as well. That's another question. How do you perceive a student's role on the overall well-being of teachers and vice versa? Oh, hugely important. Hugely important. The relationship we have with our learners and the relationships in our classroom have a huge impact on how we feel as teachers. And in the research that we've done, the relationship that you have with students, seeing your students make progress, seeing your students' successes, these are hugely impactful on our well-being. And so I think that it works both ways. I think when students have high well-being, they tend to be more engaged. That's more motivating for us as teachers, because we enjoy it more when the students are active and when they like what we're doing and they're into what we're doing. It works, most definitely works in both directions. And I think the thing that I have been arguing is we can work on learner well-being, but we can't work on learner well-being when our own well-being is suffering and when we don't understand our own well-being properly. So I do think, very explicitly think, that we need to start with the teachers in order to empower us to understand well-being for learners, and in order to walk the talk, quite literally, so that we can convey that to our learners and that they can learn from us. I hope that answers these questions.
Yes, I hope also. I hope you found the answer. And yes, I don't think there is question
No,
there.
two people have their hands up.
Hands up. Okay.
I don't
Yes.
know if that's
Yes, I think Kemrat sir, would you like to say something?
Okay. Dear Sarah, hope to see you here. Actually, I missed the first 45 minutes your presentation, but as usual, when you present, you're full of energy. You inspired me. I have some questions. Do you think sense of belonging or community increases the level of teacher well-being?
Yes. Definitely. Yes, no question. So if we look, there's something called, in self-determination theory, there's something called the basic needs model. And the basic needs model says that every human has 3 basic needs that need to be fulfilled for well-being, and also actually for engagement, but that's a bit of a different perspective. One is a sense of competence. You need to feel that you are able to cope with the challenges that you've got to face, that you can do the teaching that's required of you. So you need to feel competent and able to cope. The second one is a sense of autonomy. You need to feel, and that was one of my slides, and I'll share with it later, is you need to feel that you have some autonomy in your job. And teachers generally have quite a lot of autonomy. So they have quite a lot of freedom to make decisions about the order they do things, the kind of activities they do, the way that they teach, and so on, even if the curriculum is constrained. And then the third one is a sense of belonging. So those are the 3 basic needs: competence, autonomy, and sense of belonging. So feeling that you are supported in your community, feeling a sense of belonging in your institution with your learners, in the profession as a whole, is hugely important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question: do you think perfectionism increases or decreases teacher well-being?
It's widely known to decrease teacher well-being. So perfectionism is unrealistic. Now, you have to be careful in our understandings of this. Perfectionism is defined as wanting something to be perfect. Now, when it's what we call healthy perfectionism, but I don't like to use the term because I don't think there is a such thing. When you are ambitious for excellence, let's word it like that, that can drive you to do the very best of yourself. So it can push you to higher goals. It can push you to excellence. Perfectionism is that you make your self-worth dependent on getting everything absolutely perfect. And that's unrealistic. Nobody anywhere on this planet gets everything perfect the whole time. There is no such thing. It's illusionary. So you're always setting yourself up for a fall with perfectionism. So we need to make a distinction between striving for excellence, which is healthy and motivating and can lead to brilliance, and striving for an illusion, which is perfection, which will never be attained. And that can only ever be disappointing and damaging and frustrating. And it also means that usually people have made their sense of worth contingent on this sense of perfection, which is not going to be achieved. So having a drive for excellence is fine. It can lead to brilliance. Having a drive for perfection is very damaging because it's unrealistic.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, a good teacher should be a good psychologist and researcher. Actually, this is my quotation. Thank you very much.
That's a great one to end on. And yes, and I'm going to say this very deliberately, actually, because I've got a new book coming out, and I literally just before I came here got an email with a picture of it, so I'm all excited. That teachers mustn't think that psychology is something they know nothing about. My experience of working with teachers is teachers know an enormous amount about psychology, because psychology is about how do I motivate my learners? How do I make sure they feel comfortable in my class? How do I make sure that they don't feel anxious? How do I make sure they don't feel embarrassed? How do I make sure we have good group dynamics? All of that is psychology. It's not, some people have this idea that psychology is just about cognition and that you need to be a psychologist. Nobody needs to be a psychologist for these kinds of things. We know, I think teachers are the perfect people to do this, and they know a lot about this already. I think what we have to be careful with in the relation to well-being is all about understanding your daily fluctuations of how you try to get a sense of meaning and satisfaction. Mental health issues are something different, and they need professionals. And if you have got issues such as depression, social anxiety, burnout, then you need to, that's a different thing, and that's not what we're addressing here. And that requires professional support from professional psychologists and so on. And I think I'm really glad that you raised that, because I think that's an important distinction to understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you. So this is the end of our session, actually. Thank you for your presence, actually, and thank you for accepting this invitation, Sarah. It was really wonderful to hear. Yes,
it was
thank
lovely
you.
to join you. And if anybody does have questions and wants to email and get in touch, then I'm more than happy to be in touch. Somebody's raised their hand. I don't know if there's one more question. Narayan.
Narayan. Okay, Narayan sir. Are you there, Narayan sir? Would you like to say something, or would you like to ask something, sir?
So actually not, ma'am, but I'm very inspired with Shahraz's presentation.
Okay.
And basically we learned a lot about well-being, and still I'm confused about hedonism. Would you mind repeating the word that hedonism, Shahra?
Yeah, so you want me to explain so hedonism is about when you strive for constant pleasure satisfaction. And that's it's always short-lived, and it's never going to get to a long-term solution. You're always going to want something new, something more, something else. So I think the hedonic treadmill, as we call it, is where you're always striving for something to satisfy that craving of pleasure and satisfaction. But I think
related with short-term well-being, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you can be happy, and I think you can want to have moments of joy and pleasure, but that alone will not lead to overall well-being and satisfaction with life. Does that help any?
Yes, then thank you. I got it.
Thank you, Narayan sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your question.